Good afternoon to everyone who joined us online as well as in the room. Um, Welcome, a very warm welcome to this next edition of TRED Talk, which is hosted by the TREDS initiative at CPR. TREDS initiative is Transboundary Rivers, Ecologies and Development Studies. It's a research cluster. We call them initiatives. I'm Srinivas Chokkakula. I'm the president and chief executive at CPR. And also, I lead the TREDS initiative. And for those people who are familiar with TRED Talks, I mean, you are aware of it that we have recently been organizing talks that are related to a research program that we have been working on with, which is supported by the National Mission for Clean Ganga. We have recently completed it, and now we are continuing with the TED Talks that are theme of our core interests, which is you could see generally the broader area is water policy and governance, but we have recently been sort of organizing events to focus a bit more on this water security for the Viksit Bharat, the general vision right now that we have. And then we wanted to raise issues that are related to water security in this. We've recently launched a series of TREDS dialogues, which are closed doors ones, which are by invitation only, but we are planning to. We picked up the first one on institutions. The first TREDS dialogue that we have organized. The next one, I think at least we are thinking that we should focus on the upcoming Faraka agreement renewal. But this TED talk, partly because there is a certain kind of background to it, is that it's increasingly recognized that water security is not just about access to quantity or access to good, safe water, quality. It's not just about quantity and quality, but also the other critical dimension is about how well we can cope with the risks that are associated with water security, water sector. It is particularly so because of the concerns around global warming and the primarily very often this is not adequately acknowledged is that the impacts of climate change are most profoundly manifested in the form of risks associated with water, which is something that we will is the focus of today's talk. We have Dr. Ashim Sattar from IIT Bhubaneswar. He's a professor there, assistant professor, and is also someone very few people who have been consistently producing quality work, and his scholarship is quite well known. Something that struck me while I was looking up his work was that I think we had this very unfortunate incident in 2023, and where the South Lhonak Glacier breached. And I had a chance to basically look into work. I did some work post that disaster. But Dr. Satas is one of those publications that highlighted the vulnerabilities of South Lhonak, and it was published in 2021. So one of those things that actually tells you about is one obviously about his own scholarship and his own interests, but also the critical importance of research in bringing this kind of knowledge that could have avoided the kind of losses that we have experienced due to these risks. So with that backdrop, let me just introduce Dr. Sattar, who is joining us from Bhubaneswar online. Dr. Sattar, as I said, is a professor at IIT Bhubaneswar and is a leading expert in glacial or GLOFs, glacial lake outburst floods, and glacial-related hazards. He's an expert member of recently constituted Sikkim Commission on Glacial Hazards, Government of Sikkim. He's also an expert member of glacier and permafrost hazards in mountains, a scientific standing group of International Association of Cryospheric Sciences and the International Permafrost Association. His research primarily focuses on climate impact on the Himalayan cryosphere, remote sensing-based glacier modeling, and modeling of GLOFs and other mountain hazards. He has expertise in several aspects of high mountain hazards, risks, and adaptation. His research is spread over across the globe. Has worked in Himalayas, Andes, Iceland, Central Asia, and also he has worked at local and regional scale with very important assessments about the risks that are associated with glaciers. So Dr. Sattar is a founder of Cryosense Lab at IIT Bhubaneswar. I hope that he would tell a bit more about that Cryosense Lab, which sounds very interesting. And he's leading a working group with mountain communities, policy makers, and various stakeholders on the subjects of glacial hazards, vulnerability, and risk assessment. He has published widely, and his recent focus, as I understand, is the GLOFs impact on hydropower and transboundary hazards. And he's actually working right now on iOS and Android applications as an integral part of GLOF early warning systems. So today, perhaps I was looking for his work on the transboundary dimensions, but I think he chose to talk about the cryospheric hazards and risks, transboundary implications in the Himalayan region. Before I call on Dr. Sattar to take over and then give his presentation or give his talk, I just wanted to couple of housekeeping rules, kind of. One is that you are requested to put your questions in the Q&A space there on Zoom, and also I think in the room, put your mobiles off, please. I think the plan is, Ashim, the plan is to basically have you speak for 35 to 40 minutes, and then we'll open up for question and answers. So over to you. Thank you, Ashim.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Srinivas. That was a wonderful introduction. I'm sure I was not expecting that. And I'm really, really glad to be connected with TED Talks, a very important initiative when it comes to policy making and water-related issues. And today's talk, when I got this invitation, I was quite happy with looking into, the website, and also the topic of this talk is to deal mostly cover the transboundary aspects, which is very, very important at today's world of climate change. So today's talk, I am mostly be focusing on cryospheric hazards broadly, but also would like to maybe highlight upon some of the water security issues that we have in India and the neighboring countries. So, as rightly mentioned about the water treaties, and there I'm happy that at the final moment I could put a couple of slides on the water treaties, and that is will be interesting to take over here into the discussion part. So I'm gonna share you my slide. Please let me know if you see it on your screens. There you go. Is my screen visible to you?
Yes, we can see you. I think we should. Yes, it's also
okay.
On slideshow mode.
So this is the title of my talk, Cryospheric Hazards and Risk, Transboundary Implication in the Himalayan Region. I would be mostly talking about the implications mostly in the Himalayas. Before I go ahead, Dr. Srinivas already introduced the Cryosense Lab at IIT Bhubaneswar, which I am the founder and leading working group working on glacial hazards, vulnerability, and risk assessments. So we work on different domains, mostly related to high mountain hazards, transboundary hazards like glacial lake outburst floods, avalanches, early warning systems, water security problems, and also we look into recent technological advancements like application of artificial intelligence and machine learning into understanding some of the complex problems that we have in the high mountains. And also we are interested in collaborating with different policymakers, stakeholders from different parts of the country, and also worldwide. So with that introduction to the lab, I would suggest to visit the website. If you just type Cryosense Lab IIT Bhubaneswar, it takes you to the website of our lab here. You can see more details on our expertise and the work that we have been doing and the future plans. And there are also some of the opportunities for students who also wants to work in this domain of glaciers, to be specific on glacier hazards. So with that background of my lab, I'm just gonna move forward with some basics, and then uh, just to give you a background of what my talk would be and why is it important and what motivates us to take it forward. So when we talk about Himalaya, all that comes into our mind is these high mountain peaks, the Mount Everest, and the other peaks that we have. They are very beautiful, covered with snow, and the landscape itself is just very, very beautiful. In that case, what we do not know is also that these beautiful landscapes can have a lot of hazard potential in terms of glacial lakes, permafrost. But again, the question comes is, uh, why is Himalaya more sensitive to climate change? So climate change is now has been, uh, you know, a fact now that it is happening with all the evidences we have from around the world, not only glaciers, but also different domains. But when talking about glaciers, we have been seeing them as the major evidence of climate change that is witnessed worldwide. So the question here is, why is Himalaya more sensitive to climate change? Is it Do we have any evidence that tells us about its sensitiveness to changing climate? Let us have this particular um, figure that tells you, there's a concept called elevation dependent warming. So there is, as we go up, we'll definitely feel, the temperatures go down with a lapse rate of minus 6.5 degrees Celsius. But when you are trying to look into this particular, the bar plot on the top right, it's a comparison between the temperature anomaly from 1950s towards the 2000s, late 2000s, I mean 2016. You see what's happening to mainland India and what is happening to the Himalayas. What do we see that, if you look into this part lately, what's been happening, that the Himalaya has been warming up faster. If you look into the temperature anomaly, then the mainland India. So that tells about the sensitivity of these high mountains. There can be multiple reasons to that, but one thing that I can at as a layman that I can think of, there are many scientific reasons that basically look into the energy balances. But you can see here, these high mountain peaks are very tall mountain peaks, and you have clouds that cover, expose them, and the elevation which is below certain elevation is now insulated, and the solar, electromagnetic radiation does not reach the surface. They're blocked by the clouds, and these are basically exposed continuously because they go beyond the level of the clouds, and there's more warming, and there's more insulation which is below. So that's one of the reasons that can be understood. Now let us understand what change has been doing to these glaciers. If you look into this on the left, I would, since I have a lot to talk about disasters, I would not take much time on the background, but just to make you understand that over the years there has been a lot of, uh, you know, um, change in the mass of glaciers. That means that we're losing a lot of glacier mass. When I say glacier volume or mass, I'm talking about stored water. It's basically glaciers melting, and then they make all its way down to the different river valleys. Especially if you see here, it's a paper by Sheen et al. In 2020, where we see that, we have uh, we have a lot of glacier mass loss in the central and eastern part of India. And if you look into western part of India, here we see that there has been comparatively less less mass loss. But if you look into these specific glaciers in different parts of the Himalaya, whether it is eastern, central, and western Himalaya, we see that the glaciers have been receding and losing mass over the years. So, I mean, some of the questions that we should be concerned about at this moment is what's the number of glacial lakes? How many number of glacial lakes we have up there in the mountains? Uh, Increased frequency of glacial lakes. Do we understand the phenomena or the magnitude frequency relationships between these events, or is it rising? It is coming down. We see lately a lot of avalanche events, like for example, slope degradation and extreme precipitation events. When I talk about that, is leading to cascading hazards. Debris flow and hyperconcentrated flow is one of, again, a very important topic that has a lot of transboundary implication as such. And thawing of permafrost, which is again, it's one of the major coming disasters in the future that we see from the studies that we have so far. When we talk about disasters, in the audience, I'm sure there might be people from different domains, whether it is hydrology, atmosphere, lithosphere, someone working on the policies. So they basically are all connected. If you look into this, the process and mechanism that is happening in the cryospheric domain are all impacting the other spheres. So this is a multidisciplinary, or I would say a transdisciplinary subject to study, where one particular expertise cannot solve a particular problem. So where we bring into policymakers, stakeholders, climate scientists, hazard experts together to solve such problems, especially with the government, and everyone needs to be on one page to solve these problems, especially with the transboundary issues and climate change impacts. Well, I normally show this triangle in my talks just to show that what is driving everything lately. What is sitting on the top is the atmospheric drivers. When I talk about atmospheric drivers, I say that these are the temperature and the precipitation. So the change in temperature is leading to change in the mountain cryosphere, and eventually we have issues on to water availability, tourism, disasters. So basically what is happening is on the top is climate change, and eventually we get those consequences as a response to climate change. So my topic today is transboundary cryospheric hazards, especially in the Himalaya. But before I talk about those, I would like to have you a broader idea about how these are classified. So if you look into cryospheric hazards, they're broadly divided into two different types based on their time, like short-term hazards and long-term hazards. If you look into glacial lake outburst floods, glacier calving, cloudburst cascades, these are very short-term hazards. That means it can have impact in a few hours to days or months. Whereas there are long-term hazards, which is sea level rise. Because of the melting glaciers, they're contributing water to the oceans. And as a result, in a long term, we have sea level, which is rising. And it is a potential hazard for the coastal regions. Permafrost degradation, something which is lately been debating. And we have many research telling that the permafrost is degrading over time, and it is leading to a lot of slope failures up in the mountains and in the high latitudes. Water security is an emerging problem. We all are aware of it, that climate change has been severely impacting water security in different countries, especially in India, where we have the broad three river systems, Indus, Ganga, and Brahmaputra, where we share a lot with our neighboring countries, and that's where water security needs to be greatly researched in the coming years or presently. I would like to skip this slide just to, this is a schematic, not taking much of a time. All of us know how glacial lake outbursts are created. It's just a tsunami, I would say, a tsunami happening somewhere in the mountains. And the water just comes, gushes down, and you have the settlements, the infrastructure at great risk. And if it comes down, it has severe impact on these disasters. Okay, what I would like you to point out, I would like you to pay your attention is to look into the number of.
Dr. Sattar, if you could just play that video clip, I mean, I think for the benefit of the.
Okay, so here you go. So if you have a tsunami, if I can show you again, so it's something like a tsunami that's created in the high mountains. You have an impact onto the glacial lake, and a huge impulse wave gets created. And imagine a tsunami happening at 4,000 meters above mean sea level, and that water gushes down the valley with steep slopes going up to 60 degrees at times, on an average to have a 25-degree slope. So, you can imagine the energy that these floods may have. But what I would like you to bring your attention to is that these numbers are shocking, and that's what motivates us. I would not say motivates us, but it's something which is concerning for scientists, policymakers, and also disaster experts. If you look into the number of glacial lakes, that has doubled in its number, and also in its area over the last 40 years, 38 odd years. And interestingly, what is happening is a question mark with the change in these numbers. What is the hazard situation going to change, and how is it changing? Where do we see ourselves in the future? That's where these questions I'm going to answer today in this talk. Whether it is hazard situation, I'll be talking about what's the future of GLOF hazard, water security, transboundary hazards between countries with India and neighboring countries, and so on. I hope you would enjoy the rest of the talk. With that background, I would start on transboundary hazard. So when I talk about transboundary, I'm talking about two or multiple countries. It has to have a boundary. And when something originates in a different country, has an impact on a different country, we normally try to term them as transboundary problems, because there are multiple countries involved, at least two. So if you see here, what we have is the mountain ranges spread across the Himalaya, the Hindu Kush, the Karakoram, the central Himalaya, again divided into the western, the central, and the eastern. On the eastern side, we have the Hangduang Shan. So these mountain ranges, they do not fall exactly on top of country boundaries. You may see that these are beyond the country boundaries, or may extend beyond the boundaries of the country. That's where the glaciers can be in the same mountain range, but again be in two different countries, right? That's where the transboundary policies come into play. So India shares its border with other countries, surrounding countries. But again, on the left, what I would like you to see is in the major Indian water river systems, that is Indus, Ganga, and Brahmaputra, you have more than 20,000, 25,000 glacial lakes spread across. And that says it is, again, when I say about basins and mountain ranges, I'm not talking about country boundaries, but the basin boundaries, which might also extend beyond country boundaries. So that's where the concept of transboundary hazards policies comes into play. So, some of the questions that we normally try to propose in the projects is, what is the current status of transboundary hazard? Do we know anything about transboundary hazards? What do we know? Where do we go ahead? Where are we heading to? And what are the new things that we need to look into? In terms of glacial lake threat to India, high altitude lake slopes, whether the lakes are going to grow in the future, what is going to be its maximum extent, what are the uncertainties with GLOFs, can the risk be minimized, whether it is through structural, non-structural policies that look into both structural as well as non-structural measures, and then where is the priority of early warning systems or priority zones of mitigation. Those questions lead us to look into the statistics of population exposed to GLOFs. This is a very interesting story. No, sorry, it's a very important research paper published in one of the top journals, Nature, where the population exposure to glacial lake outburst flood specifically was quantified. And what you could see here is this particular pie chart, where you see that India and the neighboring countries have the highest population exposed to glacial lake outburst floods. And among these countries here in the high mountain Asia, you see that India is contributing to 32% of population exposed to GLOFs. But what is striking here is I've highlighted this box here. The green color represents the population in high mountain Asia, HMA, and whereas the other colors, red represents Alps, Andes. It's a global study, and where we can see that in high mountain Asia, where Himalayas are, or other mountain ranges like Karakoram, Hindu Kush, with different countries like Nepal, Myanmar, Bhutan, China, Pakistan, and so on. This particular region, the exposure basically starts within 5 to 10 kilometers from the source of the hazard, that is the glacial lake, which means that there are settlements quite close to the settlements, and that actually increases the exposure and also potential warning times in terms of glacial lake outburst floods. Now, when we got the statistics about glacial lake outburst floods, number of glacial lakes, population exposed to GLOFs. But when we bring into the transboundary context, we have to look into how much of these glacial lakes are in a different country and can have its impact on a different country. So here we did an analysis where we tried to look into the lakes which are just beyond the borders, country borders, and can have potential impact in different countries. So if you can see here, these are the lake within the buffer zone. This is the buffer zone, which is 50 kilometers from the border, and then the transboundary lakes are the lakes which are marked in red color, which can have potential impact on a different country being located in a different country. Now, if you look into the statistics of the transboundary glacial lakes, we see that the maximum number of lakes which are transboundary in nature is located in China and can have an impact in India. That's something of concern that we see. What is important here to notice is that the glacial lakes which are located towards China, it's in the Tibetan plateau where there's no much of settlements, whereas as it enters India, potential GLOFs from those lakes, if it enters India, it can expose the infrastructure and so on. So that is something which we've found out the rankings of different parts here. Again, this is some statistics that tells us, whether the glacial lake can have an impact from an avalanche. These transboundary lakes that's been already identified, we again see that, it's China to India. You can see that the number of lakes that can have an impact directly or indirectly. You can see the red ones say direct impact on the lakes. You can see a photograph here. How can it come and hit the lake? And you see that this portion, the China to India, has a maximum number of lakes. Now, coming to the potential exposure, this is just a first order assessment. We are looking into the buildings that can be potentially exposed to transboundary GLOF events. We see that eastern Himalaya, especially in the central Himalayan part, we see a lot of buildings that are potentially exposed. It not necessarily tells that these will be in danger, but this is just an exposure assessment telling that it is potentially exposed. Coming to similar statistics of the bridges, we see a similar trend where bridges are located in those locations where transboundary exposure is potentially there. Again, hydropower dams, these are again some of the data that we use. This has been updated now. I do not have the updated data to show you, but just to show you, give you an overall idea about how they are exposed to transboundary glacial lake outburst flood. Now coming to the next, that's importance of earthquake. Though statistics, earthquakes, if you look into this picture, this is where we see a lot of earthquake epicenters, it's flooded with epicenters. We can't even see the background. Different sizes size of the circles telling you the magnitude of the earthquake. So far, the statistics says that there is no direct relationship between earthquakes and glacial lake outburst floods. We do not see any statistics telling us that glacial lakes are directly connected to earthquakes. But when we look into these epicenters, we see that it also has a transboundary implication. But first, let us understand what impact can earthquake have on glacial lakes. Let us say this, 25th of April 2025, 7.8 magnitude earthquake happens in Nepal, the Great Gorkhan earthquake that impacted settlements. It was a great tragic event. But what are we interested here is to look into what impact it had on glacial lakes. This is a paper that talked about the cracks that formed on top of the glacial lake moraines. You can see the author standing on top of this cracks here that actually formed after the earthquakes. Even though there is no relationship with the frequency of earthquake and frequency of GLOFs, but there is definitely a relationship with impacts in terms of disturbing the ecosystem. If you see this, this glacial ecosystem is now disturbed with major cracks being formed, and that makes it a little more potentially hazardous than what hazard levels the lake carried before an earthquake. So this is still a topic of research, but again, something interesting to look at. Okay, so that is all some of the measures that's been taken by the Nepal. We can see that some of these have been stabilized and so on. So early warning systems has been set up, and these are some of the examples we have for mitigation. But that is not the only thing that we should be focused on. What is not important here is not the frequency relationship between earthquake and GLOFs, but also amplification of any GLOFs because of earthquakes. So let us take an example of a lake which is called the Gongba Tongsha Lake that had an outburst in the year 2016, and it had severe transboundary implications since it originated in China and had an impact in Nepal, right? To give you a context of how transboundary events are important, especially glacial lakes. Some of you have already might have come across one of my papers that I published here. This particular, I would like to call this as small lake but great impact. It is a transboundary event, and we tried to look into this particular event in detail in this paper, 2022, Sattar et al. In Scientific Reports. If you wish to have a look, you can drop me a message or you can just visit my website to have a look. So this particular transboundary event actually is a repetitive event in this valley from 1964, 1981, 1983, 2002, and 2016. But this particular specific GLOF event, that is 2016, um, was from this particular small lake, which is called the Gongbatongcha Lake, and all the previous events were from this lake called the Sirenmako Lake. So you see that this small particular lake, the small lake, had an outburst in 2016 and created similar impacts of what this lake created back in the years. What has led to such big impact from this small lake, that it had caused similar impacts to this big lake? Then we look into the year and we see that, okay, 2015 there was Gorkha earthquake that actually deposited a lot of sediments, landslides that deposited a lot of sediments along the valley, and that valley got remobilized with this small amount of water that came down the valley from this lake, and that could create a disastrous event. The Bhutkoshi hydropower was completely destroyed in this event. And these were all being captured. I'd not go into detail. You are free to look into the papers, but I would cover the rest of the presentation with some important topics. I'm going to skip this, but you can see that the landslide density here, this is the glacial lake where it flew, it actually came all the way, taking this route here, and you can see a lot of landslide density that was kind of triggered during the Gorkha, and a lot of sediments you can see here were available for remobilization. Early warning systems are important in such cases where you have two different countries involved, and you should be prepared, and early warning systems are one good way to prepare and also to get better warning times in such potential events. Coming to the next hazard, that is permafrost. We all have come across some of, I would broadly cover all of these today, but if you would like to have detailed discussion of any of these topics, feel free to drop me an email or talk to me over social media. But again, coming to the next hazard, that is permafrost, something which has lately been greatly researched, and it is a known fact now that permafrost exists, and this is something which we call as frozen ground, at least consecutively for 2 years, where temperatures are on an average maintained at sub-zero temperature. And when these frozen ground degrades, because of climate change, they tend to initiate mass movements in terms of creep movements, in terms of landslides, in terms of avalanches. So all that sort of hazards are existing. So this is one of the papers recently by from I think IIT Mandi, where you could see some of the implication of permafrost degradation, that the slope starts moving, cracks start moving, and this is happening in the high mountains. But most importantly, for us, what is important for us to understand, that permafrost is widely spread not only in the Himalayas, but also the entire high mountain Asia, covering multiple mountain ranges beyond country borders. So, the degradation of permafrost eventually is leading to, can lead to, or may lead to, with impact of climate change, can lead to availability of loose sediments as they degrade. You can see, how these sediments are actually glued together in permafrost. As they degrade, when temperatures go beyond 0 degrees, they tend to melt, they tend to degrade. And as a result, what happens, we have a lot of creep movements, a lot of subsidence, and a lot of loose debris materials available up in the mountains, which are ready to be mobilized. That is what we have seen in multiple GLOF events, that these are not just water moving down, but also carries along with it a lot of debris. Where do these debris come from? These debris are either through landslides or slope failures from the surrounding slopes in the valley, or because of the debris that is coming out of the permafrost eventually as it degrades, right? So that's where we would like to focus on what's the spread of permafrost, how accurately can we demarcate these zones of active, I would not say active, but at least the existence of permafrost and how it is degrading over time. Now, coming to the water security issue, it's a very, very, very good paper that I would like to highlight upon. This paper actually looked into the concept of demand and supply, and tried to group the water towers of the world based on its vulnerability, and they called those water towers. And they found out that the Indus Valley, in the Indus water, the Indus Valley, I would say, the Indus watershed is one. The water tower was identified to be one of the very vulnerable water tower that was based on your demand and your supply. When you're talking about supply, you're talking about rainfall events, you're talking about snowfall events, and you're talking about the volume that the glaciers are holding, water, freshwater volume that the glaciers are holding, the snow is holding, and the precipitation, which is also giving in fresh water to these water towers. And then all of these water towers also have a demand index. That is the demand. Is it the irrigation, the industry, the domestic use, or the natural demand? So when you do this demand and index thing, they kind of categorized the water towers based on vulnerability in the entire world. And you could see that you know uh, we have the most vulnerable water towers here in this part in the high mountain Asia. You can see here, this is where the ranking of Indus came in demand index, and this is where you can see the supply index is, this is where Indus basin actually lies. Right? So you can see that how both Indus has higher demand and higher supply, but when the demand is higher and the supply is less, that also becomes very vulnerable. Now the question is, where are we going to? What is happening to us in the future? What is happening to these glaciers? So we know that we have 1.5 degree of average global warming. If you compare it to the pre-industrial times, that is 1850s and before that, um, this anomaly in temperature, it's a global average. So some of the areas in the world is warming more rapidly, some are warming less rapidly, but on an average we saw that it's 1.5 degrees average globally. But 2.1 degree warming in the Himalaya. So you could see that a contrast between 1.5 and 2.1. That's because of the elevation dependent warming that I initially introduced you to. So if you look into the the mountain ranges in the Himalaya, you can see that what is going to happen to the glaciers in terms of 1.5 degree, uh, you know, uh, 1.5 degrees Celsius, which we are supposed to maintain. This 1.5 degree projection can let you can see that how much of it is getting at which mountain range, how much is getting lost. So the Paris Agreement says that uh, we need to limit the overall warming within 1.5 degrees. So that's not into specific areas, but I'm talking about the average, right? So these can vary, and you can see that what impact it is going to happen if you have already reached 1.5 in the future. Now coming to the risk and the glacial lakes in the future. This is a paper by Zheng, again in Nature Climate Change, which tells about what's the scenario of glacial lakes today. What is going to be the risk? When I talk about risk, it is taking into account the hazard, the exposure, and the vulnerability. So that's where the concept of risk comes. On the left here, you see the state of uh, the glacial lake area. uh, the gray color here tells the present, and as we go, these are projections for different representative concentration pathways at 2.6, 4.5, and 8.5. And the final pink color here is a ice-free situation where you would find, where you expect the entire glacier ice to melt and with the bedrock exposed. So these are some of the scenarios which were modeled, which were looked into, and then you could see contrasting behavior towards the east and the western part. If you look into the western part and eastern part, what do we see in the eastern part? That there is not much of an scope to increase in the number of in terms of glacial lake area, because they have already reached a threshold, or they have already nearing to its maximum extent. But I would say yes, it is nearing to its maximum extent. That is an ice free scenario that is given here in pink. And if you see the western part, there is still a lot of scope to grow uh, in different. If you look into the different climate projections, you see that this particular eastern Himalaya has been identified as the hotspot of GLOF risk and exposure, whereas in the western Himalaya, it is said that this particular risk or the hotspot is going to shift towards west in the coming years. So this is well seen here. And if you're looking into the risk as well, you'll see this is the risk value for the different mountain ranges. What we see that it is going to shift towards um, the risk remains high in the risk remains very very high in the central and the eastern Himalaya, whereas the number of glacier the area of glacial lake is going to increase and shift towards the west. The the question here that comes to my mind is, why is there a discrepancy between these geographical region? Is that eastern Himalaya, central Himalaya, they are mostly have thinner glaciers. When I say thin glaciers, I would like to say that they have less thickness and volume compared to thicker glaciers in the west. And second thing is, they are both in different climatic regimes. On the right, we have on the east, we have mostly been impacted by, influenced by the monsoons. On the west, we have the western disturbances, and there is a concept called the Karakoram anomaly, where glaciers are stable over the years, and some of them are even showing positive mass balance, which means they're growing. So that's where we have bigger glaciers taking longer time to respond to climate change, whereas smaller glaciers are more sensitive to climate change. So in that way, we see, these domains, these regional geographical regions behaving differently in the future. Coming to when I spoke about water storage, these glaciers also store a lot of fresh water, and that's one of these water treaties, the water treaty concept, where you sign legal documents and you know looking into the water availability between two countries. And this we all know about the Indus water treaty between India and the neighboring country. So where we it was the water which was coming into the Indus River was quantified and its tributaries and was shared between the two countries. Then the Ganga Water Treaty, again, it was for 30 years of agreement, and it is now in the phase of renewal. We are now in 2026, so it's something which is again, needs re-evaluation of the existing water resources, and that too when countries like Nepal, India, China, and Bangladesh getting involved here. So let me show you some of the work that we tried to do here, some of the existing data sets using ice thickness and glacier ice volume, which is stored. I'm about to end my talk. I would request a few more minutes to have patience, and then we can have a discussion. So in this, we can see that this is the Ganga basin, the Ganga river system, and where we have the glaciers is here in the Indian part, that is in the state of Uttarakhand, and you can see how they are distributed in different sub-basins in Uttarakhand. And you can see if you look closely, Yamuna is here, Upper Ramganga is here, and these blue colors show you the glaciers. And they may look very small to you here because of the perspective, but some glaciers are even 20 kilometers odd in length. So again, when we talk about these water treaties, that's because these basins, the river systems are shared between several countries, and it is important to also know how much water is stored in the glaciers, and not only that, but how is it going to change in the future because of climate impact, right? So when a treaty is signed or a treaty is been discussed, it is always important that what is going to be the impact of climate change onto the glaciers in the coming 30 years or 40 years, where till the time the treaty is signed, that we have enough, or we have, we at least know the numbers, water which is going to come down the valley because of climate change. So that is one important thing that I wanted to mention here. And sorry for the slide, it just went out. But in Ganga water treaty, what was important, it is the Indian part here, and you see here is Bangladesh, Nepal, and you have a lot of water coming down to Farakka, and that's where you have water coming in the lean seasons to Bangladesh the from the water in the Ganga system. Okay, so with that, I would end my talk, but with a few takeaway points. 40 minutes exactly. So
Yes.
My takeaway points here would be, in transboundary aspects, when you're talking into water security, first and foremost thing is to looking into the seasonality and the natural water towers in terms of demand and supply index. That's where there is supply. There is glaciers, especially in the Himalayas. When you're talking about all the three important river systems, it's Indus, Ganga, and Brahmaputra. It has glaciers. So we need to consider the impact of climate change on glaciers and its implications in water security. Second thing, when I talk about glacial lake outburst floods, I would also say that they can pose transboundary risk, potential risk to different countries. So it's always important that these are being evaluated when policies are designed. My third takeaway point would be on permafrost. That is an emerging hazard or risk, I would say, along with water security. That's because the glaciers are melting, and that threatens, border roads, tunnels, hydropower, and trigger and amplify glacial lake outburst flood events. So the monitoring permafrost is also going to be a part of these policies, and I'm not sure whether they're already been incorporated. I'm sure if I'm not up to date with that, but if it is incorporated, it is something which is essential to be incorporated into into policies, disaster policies, and so on. Coming to early warning systems, cross-border hydrological data sharing is important when it comes to transboundary hazards, basin-wise integrated systems where you can have multiple a source sitting somewhere else, beyond country borders needs to be taken into account. Coming to policies, institution, and water treaties, climate adaptation funds gaps persist in the Himalayan countries. There has to be policies which takes into account climate change impact, and so that it is secured and we have enough water for our future and the growing needs of agriculture and the communities in the mountains in India. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention. From behalf of my teammates here in Cryosense at IIT Bhubaneswar, I welcome you all to have a visit, or if you have any queries, you can write to me. If you are interested to working in different for mountain communities and policymakers, please don't forget to write me an email. With that, I'm stopping my sharing. Thank you all.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Ashim. I have actually quite a bunch of questions, but I also see plenty of recognizable names, particularly those who work on disasters and transboundary hazards. I'd look for them to come in. Perhaps, as I mentioned, Eric Bardo is also here, someone who has done extensive work in Alps, but also someone with who I worked on the South Lhonak related post disaster assessment. But I think we have also Himanshu Bhai Thakkar, who has put in a bunch of questions, but also some information there. Let's start with those questions. So this is something that you briefly alluded to about the dams and other structures, and most questions are about them. So his first question is that what are the implications of these issues, which basically means GLOF related issues, on the appraisal, clearance, monitoring, and compliance of interventions like hydropower projects? And what is the current status of these aspects? I'm not sure whether you had a chance to look at them, but that is the first question. You can also, if you have a chance to if you can actually access the Q&A, perhaps you
Yeah,
can.
I'm
Is it
just
that?
opening it and
Right.
it's right in front of my
Yeah, you
screen.
can also respond to those questions of Himanshu Bhai there. The hazard potential of GLOF depends on number of factors like existence of hydropower projects, which can play the role of multiplying the hazard potential, even more so when there are cascade of such projects. How do we deal with this? So they are related questions. In fact, there is another important question, which is about similar one. Has the experience with GLOFs informed the layout and design of infrastructure such as roads, bridges, etc., in the mountain parts of India? I mean, we have a whole
Right.
bunch of events,
Yes. So
hazardous
let
events
me.
in the recent times. The August
Yes.
25, we had, Punjab floods and others, and also earlier Chamoli disaster and then South Lhonak. So if you could respond to these questions, we can move
Yes,
on
I
to.
would be happy. Thanks. Thank you for the questions, Himanshu ji. Uh, Coming to your first question, what are the implications of the issues? And so I haven't. I'm not sure much about this. I think right now I'll not be able to answer that. But coming to your second questions about hazard potential of GLOF depends on number of factors, existence of hydropower projects. So when you say the hazard potential, here I would like to make it clear that the hazard is somewhere up. The glacial lake itself is the hazard, and the hydropower is nothing but it is the exposure. But what it can do is what we saw in the uh, recent South Lhonak event. It had an impact on the Tista 3, but the volume of the glacial lake was much more higher than the volume of the hydropower, which was 5 odd million cubic meters, whereas 50 million, 10 times the water came down all the way from high mountains with steep slopes. So what is important here is not into looking into cascading. Of course, there's some cascade, but it's order of magnitude higher. in terms of volume. So you would expect much more to happen in such cases. Second thing is design floods, So the GLOF, we have been looking into these GLOF events more lately because of impacts of climate change on glaciers and these lakes being, continuously growing over time, and both in numbers and volume. But, that's because of the advancement of science. And, some of these structures were previously made where, we did not have much of the knowledge that we have right now. But what we know now is that some of these, assessments, whether it is environmental impact assessment, cryospheric risk assessment, into any of these infrastructure development, takes into account the GLOF so that they're on the safer side when it comes to its downstream risk in that sense. When I say risk, it is both the vulnerability as well as the exposure, along with the hazard which is up in the mountains, that's glacial lakes. Coming to the third question, the hazard potential also depends on the amount of GLOF flowing down can gather. How do we deal with this, both in terms of additional hazard? Yes, that is a very important question, and also something very, very important to look into. We have also seen such examples where, such GLOF can actually trigger GLOF landslides. And these landslides would block a river channel, temporarily leading to formation of glacial lakes. Not glacial lakes, landslide dammed lakes. And they become a secondary hazard if they are not drained on time. But most of the cases we see that they remain and become bigger lakes, as we see in the Tibetan plateau. But again, we see that they sometimes drain off automatically as the debris is removed slowly because of the natural cycle of moving water. So that is again something is important. If there is in Dharali event, we could see that there was a temporary lake formed immediately at Herschel village, and that drained off later on. Similarly, we saw something in South Lhonak that drained off later on. But what we also witnessed is we saw something which formed during the Chamoli event in 2021, where it later on was drained off. So yes, of course, I agree with you that this is something which can increase the hazard potential, but also it is important to monitor these immediately after the event, or the possibility of such being possibility of such to happen in those altitudes. So modeling techniques can definitely help us in that case. Coming to the next question, that is by Tapos Das.
Yeah, he's just introducing
Okay.
himself.
Okay. Thank
So the
you
next
for your
question
regard.
is an anonymous question that I have
Has
asked you.
experiences with
So there's one question from Ajay Katuri. That's the next in.
good presentation, Ashim. Across the Indian Himalaya, there are more than 2,000 lakes. How do you think scientific community can contribute to understanding the risk associated with glacial lakes? Well, again, thank you, Ajay, for such good questions. And yes, of course, when we talk about lakes, the numbers are just beyond thousands and thousands that we're talking about. And when we are talking about risk reduction, we are trying to now we need to come down in number. So we have 5,000 lakes. Can we come down to 50? Can we come down to 100? Can we come down to 200 at least? So that we have a priority list to go on. So again, when I say here, the priority is something which is again debatable. The priority can come based on the hazard level of the lake, also the risk levels which are downstream, right? So if you understand what I'm trying to say, the glacial lake can be big enough, but there is no exposure downstream. The risk remains low. So now there has to be a balance between these two. There is hazard, there is risks, right? There is exposure, eventually they convert to risks, right? That balance, when we see, that's where, we have the scrutiny of these lakes to come to a number that is practically possible to address, right? So that is how I would approach this problem. Come down to a lower number, based on risk exposure analysis and do detailed investigation, slowly spreading across, spreading across uh, different parts of the country in that sense. I think if I've answered your question, Ajayji.
I think yes. But I think perhaps given the maybe you could actually take this your specific experience with the Sikkim Commission and mention about what kind of specific scientific contributions that you can think about could contribute to coping with this risk. Perhaps you could talk about it as an extension to Ajay's question.
Yes, with the Sikkim Commission, yes, definitely. Uh, Mahendra Lamaji is here.
Yes, he is there.
Okay. So, um,
He is part
um,
of the commission. Okay, we'll do that.
so I think with the commission, it is chaired by Akhilesh Gupta, sir, and we are looking into some of the lessons that we have learned from the Sikkim event, which was a glacial lake outburst flood that got triggered by a moraine failure. And yes, please.
Yeah, you could pick up the other questions. I think there are Mahendra Lamaji has put up a question there, and also one Pratik Sharma. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, yes, if you could.
So there is this question from Professor Mahendra Lama. Since the GLOF happens in highly securitized geographies and borderlands, what are the best ways to engage the defense forces both um, in terms of GLOF studies, disaster and hazard management? Do you think you can use a
Absolutely, absolutely, sir. This is something which is very, very important, and which is a terrain like Himalaya is one of the toughest terrains that you can have, especially with instrumentation. When you're trying to monitor GLOFs or glacial lakes, you need a lot of effort and manpower, especially skilled manpower, I would say, who are skilled in mountaineering, and these harsh climatic conditions. And it is not a layman's or layman's needs a lot of training to do that, and we have very limited manpower in that case. This is where the expertise of defense can be very, very important, not only in the initial stages but also during the process. Initial stages is when we try to look into a glacial lake, go up there. It is not possible to do bathymetry when we're trying to look into the volumes. We are also, the terrain sometimes, suddenly there's harsh weather. You need a lot of help from the defense here. Again, the second thing is when it comes to recovery and rehabilitation or emergency response, that's where it comes. We do not have enough emergency response as a scientist or a layman. That's where the defense can play an important role when it comes to giving assistance in terms of immediate emergency response when it comes to such disastrous event, and also not only in response but also preparing for an existing hazard, which can lead to a lot of risk reduction. So in that case, I'm sure it is a great asset, and of course it can help us in many, many ways.
Okay, I think Ajay Katur has more questions, follow-up questions, and we are allowing him to speak. Ajay, would you like to come in and speak
Yes.
or ask your question?
Thank
Yep.
you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Uh, Ashim, thank you for the presentation and answering the question. I have some experience in Sikkim, working in the GLOFs, and it is happy to know that you are on the committee now. Sikkim is actually one of the first states to work on GLOF risk reduction, if I understand correctly. And since 2018, they've been working on reducing the hazard part itself by doing the
Yes.
siphoning exercise to reduce the total water volume and everything. But unfortunately, in 23, they had to face the brunt of the GLOF, right? So if a state like Sikkim, which has started working on GLOF since years, could not escape from the risk manifesting, I don't see if there is any chance for the other states who haven't even understood basic risk caused by these glacial lakes, right? So, I mean, knowing some aspects of the central government and what they're working currently, I know that the mandate of reducing the GLOF risk is given to all the states individually, and those states are now looking after no, their own lakes. But a little skeptical on the capabilities of the states and their manpower in understanding the GLOF risks and the measures they can take to reduce the overall
Yes,
risk and exposure,
I
uh,
agree.
let alone the installation of the early warning systems, right? Even the early warning system
Yes.
installed on Sikkim, South Lhonak
Mm.
has gone wrong, and the early warning system itself was washed off in 23 GLOF. So, being in the committee, what type of new initiatives you guys are taking to reduce the risk for, I mean, the remaining South Lhonak as well as the other lakes in Sikkim? Thank you.
Right, right. So thank you, Ajay ji, for that question. I'd like to take up the question. And first thing is, it's very difficult. First thing is, it's very difficult when it comes to glacial lakes. But again, there are structural measures and non-structural measures that we broadly classify them. So non-structural measures are basically early warning systems, spreading awareness, reducing the vulnerability, and increased resilience among the community. Right? That would be the non-structural part. When it comes to structural interventions, you are either trying to do some sort of, siphoning or building some concrete structures where we have some good examples from other countries, but we did not face such event in the past, but 2023 event was an eye opener for us, especially. But when it comes to structural intervention, it becomes very difficult when you compare Himalayas with other parts of the country, world, because these are the steepest mountains you can have, and carrying, doing something structural would be very, very difficult. But when it comes to non-structural measures, whether it is spreading awareness or building resilience, and early warning systems, I think would work best in such cases where people are aware of the fact that glacial lakes are a potential hazard. And in such cases, with lessons being already learned from a previous event, we already have an experience that has now can be converted into learnings to our next generation or the next the next uh, group of people, so that they take the lessons from there and prepare themselves according to what happened, what was exposed, what was lost, and can we avoid that by simple non-structural measures that actually, because if you see glacial lake outburst floods, it just do not have an immediate consequence, but also has a long-term consequence. Years after GLOF, that was felt in Sikkim, where the sediment bed was filled up with sediments, and there was monsoon that came, and the water, actually the volume of water which was now could not, the valley, the river could not take up that water, now rose, and now we have downstream hazards or floods in the monsoons which is followed. So that is again a consequence. So if you look into all of these consequences from the lessons that we have learned, can we broadly see ourselves into how do we design such policies in terms of infrastructure regulation, or in terms of uh, in terms of infrastructure design. So that are the two things I would say. Structural measurements, I'm not an expert in civil engineering, but I would.
Ah, it looks like Ashim has frozen. Should we wait for him? Would you like to call him or?
I have a follow-up question for him if we have
Yes,
time.
yes, but I hope that he is able to hear you.
Yeah.
Let's wait. I think he just got. Ashim, are you there? Can you hear us? Yes. Yeah, Ashim is back, I think. He's got
Yeah, sorry,
another.
I just, there's some
You've got
network
a,
issue.
yeah, right. Go ahead. So I think you finished your response, right, Hashim?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. So I was hoping that I would follow up with a question on the, I know that you don't work on it, but then the structural responses part. I mean, I think that I also have been plenty of questions about non-structural responses, particularly given the fact that, immediately after we had a chance, in fact, Eric is also there. Eric could also come in. Would you like to come in, Eric? But um,
Do you hear me?
yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Me, yeah. So first, thank you for the presentation. And it was also very interesting. As Srinivas is mentioning, we were together in Sikkim in 2024. And we see the remain, and we also have some, we review some part of the project with this early warning system, which, by the way, at that time was not an early warning system. It was first really a test things, and it's really unfortunately that it was washed out quite quickly. So me, I have a question regarding the infrastructures. Is that I think it's something that we should be careful when we make this presentation on GLOF, is that we are speaking of water. And for many people, we are just looking to water. And the GLOF, when it is going down, it's very quickly also transform into a debris flow. And the sediment and the size of the block that are transported have a very big impact on the infrastructure downstream. And in Sikkim, in Chungtong, the dam was broken, and there is a picture where there is a block. We make a small an assessment that is not. We don't know exactly the speed of the block, but for example, if we have a speed of 10 meters per second, which is something that is really possible, the energy of this block was bigger than any of the nets that we use for rockfall. So it could not be managed. It could be managed maybe only by a dam, but in this case, the dam was completely broken. So I think it's very important that that we use also the knowledge of you include debris flow knowledge into the GLOF perspective, because I think it's important for the downstream infrastructure.
Yes,
How you
Eric.
do? Yeah.
Sorry, I just interrupted. Please go ahead.
No, I was just asking, what is your thought about this better linkage between GLOF and debris flow?
I totally agree with you, Eric. When we talk about water, it is a very simple model that we are considering, and nature is not that simple. We've seen that GLOFs are always associated with chunk of volume which can exceed even the water. So the debris flows sometimes, they can exceed the amount of water that got released. So this is a very important component, and we tend to neglect that because of the expertise, scientific advancements in debris flow models. So we have a very few models and expertise worldwide that can actually look into debris flows. And lately in IIT Bhubaneswar, we have been working a lot into debris flow models. And we do not now look into GLOFs as water flow anymore. So to be very, very clear here, we look into everything to be a mixture of debris and water, and eventually a debris flow or a hyper concentrated flow, eventually that we try to look into the downstream. And it's very, very important, not only from the previous events that we've seen, also to look into how we are preparing ourselves for the future.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now, Ajay has asked. Sorry, Eric, you have something more to ask?
I have a comment, but I could do that after.
Okay. Ajay, do you want to come in now? I do have some questions that we haven't answered in the Q&A space,
Yes,
Right, Ajay, you can come in now.
I'll go very quick. Ashim, regarding the non-structural measures, I'm actually not very hopeful on that as well, because I've been working in disasters field since Bhuj earthquake. Initially, there was some fear in the people when the new construction started. They were sticking to guidelines, reinforcement and shear walls, all that stuff. But now, after 20 years, there is no fear anymore, and people have gone back to business as usual model. So I understand. I mean, awareness can do some good in terms of reducing the risk, but not much. I mean, yeah, I'm a little sorry that I'm skeptical here. But for a country like India with literacy rates dwindling, awareness generation may not work for reducing the risk.
Yes, actually, just to add on to Ajay uh, first of all, my regards to Lama sir. I can see your questions. I think I'll come back, Lama sir.
No, I think that is an appropriate question to pick up in response to Ajay's skeptical remarks. Is that
Yes,
Professor
yes.
Lama thinks that in Sikkim, the local communities have been in the forefront, both as disaster victims and management, whereas the knowledge about GLOF is very limited. How do
Yes.
we address these knowledge gaps, knowledge and
Yes.
information gaps?
So I would give you some examples here, just to add on. What we have learned from some of the other disasters, whether it is earthquakes, since GLOF is something new that has come to picture because of climate change implications, but we have earthquakes going on for some time now. Of course, so we have had great loss with earthquakes. So if we can, so like we have zonations for earthquake zones, that we strictly, whether it is construction, we look into the zone. Okay, Delhi this lies in zone 4, zone 5, zone 6. We have earthquake zonation, and it's been frequently looked into and researched, revised. But do we have something, since we have 5,000 odd numbers of glacial lakes? Can we have something which gives us a zonation in that case, based on which prioritizing these activities, whether it is awareness or going into micro scale or at lake level scale? When I talk about South Lhonak, if I would say that every person in a mountain community have access to their location and the hazard levels they're in, so they are aware. We have examples from Bhutan and other parts where many glacial lakes happened in the same valley, and now they know what to do, how to react. And we recently have communicated a research paper on that. But the point is here is, if we have handy information, whether it is in the form of a hazard map gone into everyone's mobile phone, restaurants, and they know their location through some awareness program taken by the state disaster management authorities, that how to, we do drills for fire, we do drills for earthquakes. Can we have drills for loss? Something which is, again, can help us in way to train ourselves to how to react in those situations. So I'm sure it is a tricky, very, very tough thing to do, but maybe something, I'm not sure how successful it is. It's just my thought that I can think of right away.
Yeah. So we, Ashim, just to share it with you, since you are on the commission of the Sikkim government, and we had a chance, Eric and I had a chance to visit these places and also talk to some of these key functionaries within the government as well as outside. And this is where a certain amount of sharing of the skepticism that comes from Ajay, who happens to be someone who has been working on disaster response since the earthquake of Bhuj. That was almost 25 years back. So he's been working on it, and that's the reason why I can understand where he's coming from. But we did see that the capacities of the state agencies are not equipped. I mean, at least the state agencies are not equipped, both in terms of funding, financial resources allocation, or technology or infrastructural interventions that they could do, or even the procedures and protocols that are practices that require them to coordinate with the civic society groups that are active in the disaster response spaces, particularly in Sikkim. So I'm not sure if things have improved over the past 2
Yeah, I
years,
think
but
Sikkim is doing one of the great initiatives Sikkim has taken, and has been really very proactive in terms of GLOF mitigation and awareness. I think among the other states, Sikkim has become an example where we could kind of be a learning state from where GLOF mitigation can be spread across to the other states, where initially started after the GLOF event. Very proactive steps been taken up by the government, and also DST, and also the state disaster management. I think it is the state where almost bathymetry has been done for all the glacial lakes. We know summers for the first time in India happening, where for a state where we have such good data sets. And we know also the disaster risk now downstream that's been for the state of Sikkim, and been actively involved, and a great research being done especially for the state of Sikkim. And I deny the fact that it has not been to the level, but it is going forward, and it is doing really well.
so let me, I know that you are quite familiar with Sikkim, and I think look forward to actually having you again, to share Sikkim specific responses post South Lhonak, GLOF. But let's just zoom out, and then I apologize to some of those who are there, and then put in the questions. We will come back to those questions, but just to zoom out and then look at the larger picture. You mentioned that almost 30% of the population in India is exposed to the risk of GLOFs, right? And given that scale of the risk and exposure, the one question, I mean, actually, this is something that you haven't touched on, is you always looked at transboundary as a coordination between across the international borders, but you are, I'm sure, familiar with the challenges of interstate coordination that is required to cope up with. For example, if you take the T-Star, you have got 70% in Sikkim, and then 30% of the basin in West Bengal, and then if there is also certain portion of the basin in Bangladesh, certain kind of transboundary coordination there, both across the borders as well as within the country is required. But just going back to this question, you see, given that scale of risks that India has when it comes to water security, do you think that the kind of monitoring and the knowledge production, the kind of work that you have done in South Lhonak, you are there in that space of scientific community, and I have had a chance to sort of have a ringside look at it, but I had a feeling that it is not adequate because there isn't even proper institutional level collaborations to share the data over the glaciers. For example, there are these institutions which have been tracking glacial melting of specific glaciers in the Himalayan regions. And these institutions don't exchange data at all between themselves. So I just want you to sort of share your reflections about how the scientific community is positioned to respond to the knowledge and information gaps that are there at the national scale, but also the kind of knowledge and information gaps that Professor Lama tried to sort of highlight.
Correct. So since we all know that science policy stakeholders have always been a little apart from time, but now we see more of a collaborative research lately when it comes to policymakers and stakeholders. And also data sharing wasn't very common back in the days, but now we have seen open access domains which have now been launched by many platforms by the government of India as well. And as well as the scientific community now supports open access, which means that anyone can basically have your data sets. And then now lately we have one nation, one subscription. So which basically tells you that everyone in the country is connected, and the publications are shared, and it's open access to anyone. So these are some of the initiatives we're getting closer, but what we weren't aware of. But I think data sharing is important. That gives you a sense of what is going on surrounding you, and that's where you build up your story and your, link these gaps. So data sharing is very important. I think we are leading towards it, and with these new initiatives, I think we are not very close, but at least we started, and open access is something which can lead to such. And also not only about open access of scientific literature, but also I would like to tell you that many of these data sets are now freely available, whether it is satellite data, whether it is digital elevation models, whether it is something which was created for a particular research, are put into these domains, like which are like Zonado, where you directly can just cite them and just use the data sets. And it is always encouraged that you share your data, what you have done, and make it available for the rest of the world, so that you also get cited for your work that you've done. Your efforts are getting recognized. The second thing, someone else is getting benefited from your work.
Right. Thank you, Ashim. I think I just want to use the opportunity of having Eric Bardo there and just pose one question to him, and then let's get back to the questions that are getting accumulated on the Q&A space, and then we'll wrap up. Anyway, we just passed the time. Eric, if you could come in and share some of your own thoughts about structural responses, particularly having seen the kind of Himalayan context that you have visited earlier. I'm wondering if you think that there are some possible structural responses that are suitable for Himalayan conditions. Rick?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that there is some structural measures that are possible. However, with event like South Lhonak GLOF, and maybe you have heard about the village from Blatten here in Switzerland that was also completely destroyed in 2025. There is some limits. So infrastructure could not manage the most intense event. However, what is very important, I think, for not only for Himalaya, for any mountain range, is that we manage the hazard from smaller to the biggest that we could do. And for doing that, we need to have some structural measures that are maybe able to manage the middle or the medium size event in connection with all these early warning systems, all this possible sharing of information that is used to avoid to have casualties when the event begins to be so big that it could not be managed by the infrastructures. So my message is just that there is a kind of a wide range of things to do. And if you don't do also the smallest one, it's always more and more difficult to manage as the intensity of the event is growing. So in a certain way, it's difficult to, I think it's not very wise to work only on the disaster, or the things that produce real disaster, but it's also important that for each during each monsoon, you probably have also some smaller event. And this smaller event is also doing a lot of destruction. They also make a disruption of the economy, and it impacts a lot the people. So I think we should not work only in one way. We should at least work in parallel for the two things. if we really want to be efficient in the future. And we also have the problem here in Switzerland, so it's not saying that is a problem in India. It's a worldwide problem where we have tendency to work more on the things that are very big, that goes into the newspaper, and the things that are smaller and then make maybe not very a lot of advertising, if I could say like that. We tend to not to work a lot on it, and I think that we have to really work in parallel. If you allow me, because I have to leave quite soon in 5 minutes, I just want to
just to add on to Eric, I just had a small no, I'll just take 1 minute of your time, Eric, before you leave. Is when we talk about structural measures in the Himalaya, the terrain here is so difficult and they're so steep. We should also take care of the fact that those structural measures should not be in hazard again. So that needs to be very, very concrete in a way that it needs to be very solid plan that it does not convert itself into an hazard, right? So we have seen South Lhonak, 50 million cubic meters of water coming down, tens and hundreds of Olympic-sized swimming pools of water coming down, with debris filling 100 Olympic-sized swimming pool. And we are talking about a structure we can't even hold water of half a swimming pool. So
yes, Eric, please come in. His point is that the slopes are really high when it comes to Himalayan, so and very high velocity.
I completely agree, and I was just saying that there is many elements that should be done for different size of or different range of intensity. And as I mentioned at the beginning, South Lhonak, we could not manage with any structural measure. And the village that I was stating from Blatten here in Switzerland, we could not do anything, and we know in advance. So we have several weeks to prepare, but the only thing that we were able to do is to just evacuate the people. But there is some intermediate events, and there is some event that could be maybe managed with the infra. I'm not saying that we have to use only infrastructural measure. I was really saying that we have a wide range of solution, and we should use all solution in parallel and not making one against another. And clearly, the biggest event we could not manage with a structural measure. The only things that I want to bring you as an external observer, and somebody asked that just before, it was I think it's very important to have the access to the place, to this lake. And this is still difficult in India due to the position near the border. So we see that we have some, in the project we are reviewing with Srinivas, there is some problem of access due to that. And in between, I also discussed with some friends of mine that is pilot of helicopters, because due to the size of this slope, maybe a helicopter is one of the tools that should be used to manage these things. And there is a problem is that for the civil aviation in India, the airspace is still 2,700 meters. Above, it doesn't exist. So you could not fly above that with an helicopter. This is a national rule. And maybe this is, I'm sorry because we are a little bit deviating but I think it's also important that Sikkim, Uttarakhand, Jammu and Kashmir could also ask to the national authority if they could have some adaptation of this small things. It's not very a big problems, but these small things should be adapted to the Himalaya, to the mountain range. And I think that it's also something that they should. It's very interesting, I think, to have the CPR. It's maybe something that could make the link between the demand that is driven from the field and the things that should be adapted into the law, because we could not work without any law. And I think this is maybe not very scientific, but it's something that could be also quite a big challenge if we want to advance and to work really on this topic, then from a technical basis or scientific basis.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you. I hope that you would come back and give a talk about your experiences of now sitting with the federal agency and how you are dealing with these risks in Switzerland. At some point, we'd like to have you come and talk about this small to big responses that one can actually look into, the wide range of responses one can actually look into to deal with these kind of risks. Now, Ashim, I think...
yes,
I think
I have another meeting.
Right.
So I'll have to, I'll take your permission. Maybe it's just in 5 minutes, I have another meeting.
You have to take off. Yes, we should also close. And I was just looking at browsing through the questions that are there. It's more informative and sort of sharing information or responding to your responses. And except for a very large question, I think you have to dedicate your entire life to respond to that kind of question.
I can write back maybe
Pratik Sharma. Perhaps you could respond to him. But just wanted to, I know that you, we should close in, but we should close it. Just a quick comment. I hope that at some point with your experiences at the Sikkim Commission, you would come back and share a bit more on the institutional responses. And I know that post the Chamoli disaster, the Standing Committee of Parliamentary Standing Committee on Water Resources has actually, in its report has raised this question, and I think asked the Ministry of Jal Shakti to come back with coping measures for similar kind of disasters. I hope that the Ministry of Jal Shakti has responded. I have to look it up. But while you were speaking about it, I was just wondering what is the kind of multi-scalar responses that would be required. It's not just across the borders, but also across the state boundaries and also locally, the wide-ranging ones. We will have to sort of start looking at it and look forward to having you more again and sharing your work. And I'm really keen that you share your work while that you are doing with the Sikkim Commission, particularly because given that it has had this disaster and its vulnerabilities are very high, I'm sure you will have plenty to share about how state and the communities can respond to these kind of risks. Thank you for joining us. Look forward to seeing you again. That was an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Dr. Srinivas. It was, in fact, a pleasure to be on the Thread Talk. We definitely open up doors to collaborate. I have a lot to tell into policies and also work with policymakers and also with other stakeholders. So I look forward being this to be our first meeting.
We certainly were trying to bring this particular dimension of coping with risks as an important strategy towards long-term water security of India, and then we will exchange notes and certainly we will collaborate eventually. Future.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Yeah, I would like to thank the participants for your time and the organizers, of course. Thank you, one and all. So bye for now.
Thank you all for joining us today. Bye.
Bye-bye.